to present to make that bigger. Okay. Um, so emet and truth, right? So I want to look at the idea of what is truth, but also I want to start off by talking about why this is such an essential thing. And what's interesting about truth, about emet, when I was preparing this class, is you see is that unlike the other some of the other things that we spoke about, this idea of truth of emet is really something that is a essential part of God's identity and his essence, so to speak. And we see that when it's written in the Yud Gimel Ikarim, the 13 attributes of God, when Hashem tells them to Moshe, right? And one of the essential ones is emet, right? That he's the God of truth, of um, and he's it's part of his makeup to be identified and connected to the idea of truth. We see this also, that it's so integral to God when we look at the Briat HaOlam, the creation of the world, and way in the beginning of the Torah, right? We see that the name of God has many different names. It's also an interesting study, but God has many different names, and the name, I just brought a few psukim here, but the name that's repeated in Briat HaOlam is the name Elohim. And a lot of the Hachamim talk about the idea that this name of Elohim has to do with deen, with justice, with tzedek, with righteousness, and with truth, all connected to the idea of truth and lying, of real and fake, of the idea of this essence of a clear and objective truth and reality. And only later on, once Adam, well, if you look through, it's an interesting study, but once Adam is involved and once sin is involved, then we see the idea of chesed and of rachamim and all those things coming into play. But in reality, like in his base, I don't want to say base form, but in his building blocks, God is one of right and wrong, truth and falsehood, and very clear cut, right? And this is something that we as subjective humans have to sort of how to try to emulate and challenge ourselves to be like, because for us, we're going to look more into this as the discussion progresses today, but why it's so challenging for us to do that. We also see in one of the Aseret HaDibrot, one of the 10 Commandments, the idea of Lo tisa et shem Hashem Elokecha leshav, ki lo yinakeh Adonai et asher yisa et shemo leshav. You can't use God's name in falsehood or connected to falsehood when you're, to swear with his name in falsehood or connected to falsehood. And then he's, because God is going to punish someone who does that. And when looking more deeply into that, you see that it's such an important decree, not decree, but command, because God is truth. So we don't want, or we can't, and we shouldn't connect God's name to anything that is not truth. So that's why it's a very severe wrongdoing, is to connect God to anything other than something is truth. And to use his name in connection to truth not only misrepresents God, but it's misrepresenting all that he is connected to, all of the things surrounding what kind of creator and being he is. So we see that with all this, sort of building blocks, we see how this is really something that is not only something that we need, which we'll talk about in another minute. We need truth to uphold a good society, but we also need truth to connect us to God and make us more godly. So I'm going to start with some examples, like we usually do in the class, examples from the Torah. So the examples we're going to go through today, just a little overview. Some are people who told the truth, some people that lied, and the detriments that came because of the lying. So the first one I'm going to bring in is the story of Adam and Chava, right? The first people in the world, and what happened there in the sin of Etz Hadat. So basically, I have two columns here for those that are looking on the screen at the sources, or you could just listen. I'm going to explain it, but I wanted to show the differentiation, and I actually colored, the main thing I want to focus on. So God creates Adam, God creates man, and he puts him in Gan Eden, le'ovda l'shamra, to work the land and be part of the creation. And he commands Adam, Mikol etz hagan ochal tochal. You could eat from any tree in the garden. U'mi etz hadat tovera lo tochal mimenu. But the etz hadat tovera, the tree of knowledge, don't eat from. Ki bayom ochla mimenu motamut. Right? If you eat from this, you will die. So that's the command. And then the second column is when the nachash, when the snake is trying to get Chava, get the woman to sin and eat from its adat. So if you look at the narrative here, we see that there's a nuance in the words, and not only me, but many of the commentators explain how this was an impetus to her sinning. So let's look into it. The nachash is trying to convince her to eat from it, and she says, we could eat from all the trees. The tree in the center of the garden, that's adat, that God said not to eat from it. The lo tigu bo, and she adds, or it's added here, lo tigu bo, that it shouldn't be touched, pentamutun, that we will die if we touch it. So we see here that the commentators, some of them explain that the Adam, when he was relaying the command to Chava, he added on not to touch the Etz Hadat as sort of a safeguard, that she shouldn't, with a good intentions, that she wouldn't even get close to sinning and eating from the tree. However, that misconstruction of the words caused her to now feel that since the Nachash was on the tree and he touched it, since the snake was touching the tree and nothing happened to him, so maybe she could eat from it as well and nothing will happen to her. And thus, I didn't bring the screen, but right after this, she basically eats from the tree and Adam eats from the tree, and then they get punished and kicked out and the whole thing. So we see from this, which is interesting, is that even when one may have good intentions, if we're misconstruing the truth, or essentially lying or retelling our own truth, that could lead to a negative outcome. In this case, it was punishment. It was galut. It was being kicked out of Gan Eden. It was not having that connection to God that they did at the beginning. So this is the first example that lying leads to a disconnect, right? It leads to a disconnect and a breaking in a relationship. In this sense, Adam and Chava with God. We then jump to the next example I want to look at is one of my very interesting stories in the Nevi'im, in Sefer Shoftim, the story of Samson and Delilah, Shimshon and Delilah, right? A pretty common known story, biblical story. For those that, just to refresh, it's Samson, Shimshon is the leader of the Jewish people at the time, and he is very strong, and he's protected. You could read very interesting. The Navi talks about all his acts of strength that he does. These crazy like gladiator type things almost. And the Plishtim, the enemy at the time, who wanted to take over, to bother and take over Bnei Israel, they wanted to figure out how to defeat him. So they send this, they pay off, or they're bribing Delilah to find out, she's in some sort of relationship with him, and they're trying to convince her to get his secret of his strength to them. And she tries to do this and she fails. He gives other reasons of his strength, and they don't work, obviously, because the strength was the real reason of his strength was in his hair, that his hair was never cut. And if they cut he cuts his hair, then he'll lose his strength and be like anyone else. So she is constantly pestering him to try to figure out what the source of his strength is. And way at the end, after she tried a few times, she tells him, Ach tomar ahavticha ulivcha en iti. She's saying, you say you love me, but your heart is not with me, right? She's sort of manipulating and trying to hook on to his emotional, an emotional plea with this false emotional connection, that she's saying, you claim you love me and I love you and we have this relationship and we're in love, but you won't tell me the secret. So, and then he ends up telling her, and they end up cutting off his hair and killing him, and essentially stopping the reign of the independence of the Jews in the time. And Plishtim end up causing problems to Bnei Israel until the time of David. So this was a really not a good thing. Obviously, it led to a lot of wars and a lot of subjugation. So we see that here that lying or trying to not lying, trying to um, get information out of someone using ulterior motives. Yes, it may work, but it will lead to some sort of disconnect in relationship or breaking of relationship and some negative downfall, as it does here. So we see here the idea continuously of misconstruing words and misconstruing emotions and trying to get another person to feel or act a certain way that you are trying to control and not reality, that the real truth is trying to control, essentially God. So another example I want to bring as we continue in this is the Meraglim. And the Meraglim is an interesting one because the spies, because we see from the spies how which is the point I really want to talk is how truth in humans in our limited capacity is so subjective, and how hard we have to work to not only tell the truth to others but recognize the truth within ourselves and for ourselves. What do I mean by this? So I hear Psukim, Moshe commands them to go check out the land and see how it is. And it's really just sort of a confirmation mission. They know God's giving them the land. God told them he's going to help them. And this was just sort of to look out and see what's going on there. However, when they go, they come back and they start off by saying, yes, God sent us to a land of Zavat Chalav Udvash. It's a land of milk and honey and everything's great. But, and then they start saying the negative. So we see that when lying to someone or trying to change the truth, if you start with truth, you hook the people because they know it's true, and then you start to give in your own truth or the lie, and then they'll believe you. So what happens? They say no, but it has, and they know they're feeding on the people's insecurity. They tell the people, the Amalek is there, right? Amalek was their first enemy that they were afraid of, and there's all that the giants are there, and they're very strong, and the cities are strong, and they end off by saying, we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and that's how we were in their eyes, right? This was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a projection of how they viewed themselves, thus how they thought the enemies, the other nations, viewed them. So we see here in the Meraglim is a crucial point of the fact that humans in general create their own narrative, whether that be towards someone else or even towards themselves. And we have to be careful in how we write that. And especially within our own head, because we are in our own heads, our thoughts are going around and around in our heads all day, right? We're with ourselves 24/7. So the things that we say in our head and the thoughts that we have create essentially our realities. So if we, like here, this is the example, if we choose to look at ourselves in one way, essentially that will build our persona for other people slowly, right? Whether that be true or not, we create that truth. So we have to be very careful about how we present ourselves. By the way, there's actually an interesting TED talk. I just thought of it now as I'm saying this, so I don't remember the person who gave it, but it was about power poses. And she talks about how we could wire our brains based on how we're standing. If we stand up straight, if we open our arms, if we do these poses that assert authority, it will physiologically, create confidence and a positive outlook in our minds. So that, like, if you're going to, a very important interview or a meeting or a speech or something like that, you need to feel confident about it and present well. To do these poses before will enhance your view of yourself, thus will enhance your performance in whatever task or activity you're trying to do well in. So it's the same type of thing, is that we create in our minds our own realities, and we have to be careful and make sure that they're in line with a true reality and an objective reality. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a little while, but I want to move on now for a second, and then we'll go back to that. I want to look at now for a few minutes the character of Yaakov Avinu, of Jacob. And he's a very interesting character for many reasons. But one reason I want to focus on today is that he starts off his journey, so to speak, from a place of miscommunication, of deception. Him and his mother Rivka, right? They create this scenario where they trick Yitzchak into giving Yaakov the bracha. Now, there's a lot of studies and commentators about, was this right? How they did it? Should they have done other things? Why everything happened? And I don't really want to go into that now. But what I want to talk about now is that it obviously and ended off well, in the sense of Yaakov was the chosen one, in the sense of he was the one, not Esav, that continued the lineage of Abraham and Yitzchak and Bnei Israel, right? His 12 sons were chosen to continue on, creating the nation. So obviously it ended well in a positive way of how it, quote unquote, should have ended. Should it have started this way? Could things have started a different way? That's another study that you could read. A lot of different commentators have their different opinions. But what I thought was interesting, and what I read interesting about this in connection to our discussion today about truth and lies, is whether or not it was the right thing for him to do, to deceive his father in this way for a positive outcome, so to speak. It still caused and allowed for, allowed for a lot of deception and trickery and challenge in his own life. He started off by deceiving his father, and then Lavan, his father-in-law, deceived him and caused and tricked him into marrying Leah before Rachel, and then his sons tricked him and deceived him with the sale of Yosef and bringing back his coat covered in blood, saying an animal ate him. And he lived a life of many consequences and challenges in his marital relations and challenge with his children that all had different people deceiving him, which essentially started off with him deceiving his own father. So we see I think that what we see from this story is that a little bit connected to the Adam and Chava story is that even if we have good intentions, we should really be sticking to the truth as the truth over misconstruction and lies, even if it's not blatant lies, but even if it's deception or an undercover, that we should be really trying to avoid that as much as we can and sticking to something and sticking to truth. Now, another thing that in connection to this is in connection to the Meraglim a little bit is the story in Esther of Haman, in Megillat Esther, of Haman trying to convince Achashverosh to kill the Jews because he's angry with Mordechai. So we see here, like we saw with the Meraglim, is that when someone's trying to, and this is also, it's two-sided. Well, I'll explain in a second. So basically, we see here, I'll talk about the story and then I'll connect it in a minute. I'm jumping ahead of myself, sorry. But Haman tells Achashverosh, he starts off with a truth, then he goes to a half sort of truth, and then he goes to the lie. And that progression, that progression of truth to lie is what allowed Achashverosh to believe him and to act on his words, as opposed to that if he just came out with a lie straight up. So this shows, I'll go through the in a second, but this shows as well with the Meraglim, when they started off with the truth and then led to lies as well, is that when we are wanting to deceive someone else, it's easier to deceive them and to lie when we start with truth and something that they trust, and then we veer from that. And even from ourselves, we can sometimes start ourselves with the idea of something that's true and then convince ourselves otherwise through other channels and other avenues. So Achashverosh, Haman tells Achashverosh, Yeshno am echad mefuzar meforad ben hamim. There's a nation that is scattered among the other nations, and that was true, right? Bnei Israel, the Jews were scattered among the empire. V'datem shonot mikol ha'am, and they have a different religion than the people, which was also true. We believed in one God and not many gods. That was true. But he adds, but they don't follow the laws of the land, the laws of the king. And that's why the king should kill them. And then Achashverosh says, yeah, sure, go for it. And he gives him money to do that. So this is something that that we see in the American justice system, right? When someone's going up to the stand, they say the whole truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, right? So that meaning it sounds redundant, but really it's making sure we're not misrepresenting or leaving out or adding to the truth in a way that's going to make it misunderstood. We see this in that the truth, oh, well, so I want to go back to that in a second. I'll go to a second, but I'll leave it here right now, is let's think for a second and think of why do people lie, right? Why, if the truth seems to be the easiest thing to say. It's true, like just say what's true. So why do people lie? People lie for many reasons, right? People lie in order to maybe cover up something that they feel guilty about, or they feel shameful about. They lie in order to maybe get themselves ahead, right? They want to make someone think highly of them. They want to seem smarter or better than they are. And this really shows us that it's negating your emunah and your belief and faith in God, because when you're lying, you're essentially trying to get in the favor of another human, another person, as opposed to connecting to God, who's the ultimate truth, and getting in His favor. So we see that there's that when you lie, it's getting you further and further away from God. And also, I read it, which was interesting, is that truth is the antidote to sin. And what do I mean by that? I was reading about, I thought it was interesting, is that if you commit and say, I will not lie, right? Then you're essentially not going to sin, because once someone, not most of the time or majority of the time, when someone sins, they're going to lie to cover it up, or they're going to leave things out, or they're going to try, they're going to go around in circles to cover up something that they didn't want to do or feel shameful about. So if they don't want to do that, or they taking upon themselves not to do that, they're going to essentially not sin, so that they don't get into that situation. And truth, if someone is a person of truth, it will lead to wisdom. The Hachamim, they talk about Shvat Dvarim Begolem v'Shvat Chachamim, 7 things that a Chacham has, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of them, two of them, they say is, he says, Amar shelo shama omed lo shamati. If I didn't hear something, meaning I don't know something, I say I don't know, I didn't hear. Umodel ha'emet, and he stands true and admits the truth, right? So something, if someone's smart, they don't try to cover up that they don't know something. They'll admit and say, no, I don't know, I need to go look that up, or I need to go learn it. And saying you don't know is a sign of great wisdom. It's arrogant to think that someone that I can know everything, right? I was actually just joking around this with my brothers the other night about Google. We have that now in our day and age, we have the potential to Google everything, and therefore I am Google, I know everything. And we were joking about, but that's like a very arrogant, on the one hand, it's a very arrogant thing to say, like, oh, I know everything, I could find out anything, I know everything. But on the other hand, yes, you can technically find out anything. You could research it, look it up, ask someone. So don't claim that you know everything when you don't, and use that opportunity to say, oh, I'm lacking in this area, or I don't know the truth in this area. Let me go look it up. Let me go learn more about that topic, and not claim and not think that I am above all. So essentially, admitting you don't know leads to you knowing more and having more truth. So I want to go back to something that we spoke about. It's an idea in psychology, but I want to sort of use this idea in psychology to sum a few things up that we spoke about, is the idea of schemas and truth. So schemas, I bought this picture because I think it depicts it well. I'm almost positive it was Piaget, Jean Piaget, a psychologist, who developed the idea of schemas. And schemas, essentially, like the picture shows, very simply. I mean, I'm dumbing it down a little bit so we could, it's not a psychology class, but so I'm saying it very simply. But feel free to look more into it. Schemas are basically these folders, essentially, that we categorize not the knowledge we have in the world. That's presented to us in the world, we categorize it in our brains, because we're bombarded and presented with so much information all day, every day, that it's very hard to keep track of it. So what our brain does is our brain creates categories, different categories. And therefore, when I learn new information, I will log it, so to speak, in that category, so that I could understand it and retrieve it and remember it better. So this is a good thing in the sense that it helps me learn more and remember more and connect more to the world around me. But on the other hand, it's limiting in the sense of I as this human, from my experiences, create these schemas, so they can be faulted, right? This is where sometimes you have stereotypes that start, and then therefore you maybe will make a misjudgment because you assume something based on previous schemas and previous information that might not be true, and your brain's trying to jump and do a shortcut and say, oh, this person looks like that, therefore they must be X, Y, and Z. but that might not necessarily be true. But that's where, so we have to constantly be checking. I'm saying, in this conversation about truth, is that we have to constantly be checking and evaluating the schemas that we unconsciously create, to make sure they are based in reality and truth, and not based, well, they are based on our projections and our understanding. They are subjective, but we have to constantly be checking them to make sure they're upholding truth, and not our own feelings or thoughts or subjections. Um, I want to jump into the idea of talking about lying, or 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 not telling the full truth to children. I mean, this is, I'm going to talk about this a little bit because it's not a, child development class, but I think it's something very important that we need to think about as adults. Any adult, a parent, a teacher, aunt, uncle, friend, anything, anyone who deals with children, a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes adults will lie or misrepresent the truth to a child. And they'll say, like, we're going to the zoo and it's, over 5 and up is kids. So, and the kid's 6. So, oh, if they ask you, just say you're 5. So I don't have to, I can pay the child rate, something for convenient to the parent, even something so little. And it might seem like, oh, what's the big deal? I want to save $10 or whatever. But in reality, these little things will start to teach the child, consciously or unconsciously, that lying or misrepresenting the truth is normal and is okay in the world. And it could cause 2 problems. On the one hand, it's going to cause you to have a child that's lying. On the other hand, it could also cause have a child to feel unsafe or insecure, because they don't know if the adults or authority figures in their life are lying to them. So we have to really, as much as we can, obviously there are certain things, you're not going to explain to a child on a fully truthful level, but to talk to them as truthfully as possible, on their level, and explain things to them on their level. And if something that they can't really understand, or they shouldn't, it's not on their age level at that point, say something to the effect of, I'll explain that to you when you're a little older, or that's something for grown-ups, and not to make up a lie about it, but to explain to them that you'll understand this more. I'll explain it more when you're a little older. Because a lot of times that will cause a lot of inconsistencies and challenges within the child, that they won't know how to relate to their world, how to relate to themselves, with lying, and understanding what is true, what is not true. Another thing about children who lie in general, about children lying to adults, is that a lot of times children will lie out of fear, right? They're lying because they're afraid that the parent will punish them, or something like that, or take away a privilege or whatnot. So we have to work on developing relationships. Again, this idea of developing relationships through truth is that if we develop the relationship of respect as opposed to fear, then we could explain to our children that, yes, the truth is very important. And even if the truth is something that I don't want to hear, it's still more important that I hear the truth versus you lying to me to make me happy, so to speak. So we have to work on fostering and developing those patterns and relationships in children. Lying makes one untrustworthy, obviously, right? I brought the little picture here of the famous story, the famous fable of the boy who cried wolf, right? He cries wolf so many times that when the wolf actually does come, no one comes to help him. So the same thing, if someone's constantly lying about, people aren't going to trust them, people aren't going to want to be involved with them, and they're shutting themselves off from people. But on the other hand, if someone is a liar and constantly lying to people, and not telling the truth, they're also going to isolate themselves in the sense of their emotions. They're always going to be second guessing people, because if I'm always lying, who's to say people aren't lying to me, right? So it's a double-edged sword here, in a way that a lying will essentially isolate the liar and the people around him. Another topic that's under the umbrella of truth, that I want to talk about for a few minutes, is the idea of keeping your word. Okay, the idea of not only saying the truth, right, and not lying, but also when I say something, that I'll follow through. Like if I tell you I'm going to do a favor for you, to do it, and not be flaky and not bail out. And this is important because it creates a relationship with people that they know you could rely on them, and that you're someone that's trustworthy and reliable, and you're not going to go back on your word. We see this very clearly, which is I find this like a very beautiful story, not necessarily a story, but that very beautiful point of the Torah, is that before Yosef dies, Yosef tells his brothers, that that God's going to remember you and take ve'alitem, and you're going to take them. He's going to take you out of Mitzrayim. Ve'alitem etas matayim izeh. And when you go, when God takes you out of Mitzrayim, bring my bones with you to Eretz Yisrael. And many, many years later, when God does take Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim, it says, "Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo," and that Moshe takes the bones of Yosef with him, ki yeshava shvia et Bnei Yisrael, because he promised Bnei Yisrael, "B'kol yivkod l'chim etchem, v'alitem et v'tayim mizeh etchem," right? That God, he promised his brothers, and it's so beautiful in the sense of Yetziat Mitzrayim. You read the Torah. It was chaos. It was the makot. It was b'chipazon. They're rushing out. It was the matzot. Right. It was all this craziness, and Moshe still made sure to take out the bones of Yosef to fulfill that promise, to fulfill the words to Yosef. We also see. I want to also talk about the idea of genevat dat, it's literally genevat dat is stealing someone's knowledge, but I want to talk about in the sense of using people's naivete or ignorance to your advantage, and that's also in a way really connected to lying, or not necessarily lying, but not upholding the truth. Right? There's a pasuk in Sefer Devarim that talks about lo tekalel cheresh. You can't curse a deaf person. Ulifnei ve'lo titem mechshol, and in front of a blind person, don't put something that he should stumble on. Vayiretem Elohim ani Hashem, and you should fear God. I am your God. So what is this pasuk trying to tell us? What is it showing? It's saying, don't curse a deaf person. Why shouldn't you curse a deaf person? They can't hear you, right? You could say horrible things to a deaf person and they won't know. However, and it's the same thing with a blind person, putting something in front of a blind person that they'll fall. They don't know you did it, right? So even in a situation, and obviously this can be expounded on not only to a literally deaf person and a literally blind person, but someone who's deaf or blind in terms of their knowledge, is that don't, even if no one else will know, right? Even if you withhold information, or you say things in a way that this person doesn't really know, don't do it in a way that's going to use your knowledge or your upper hand, so to speak, and whatever it may be. A lot of times this happens in business, right? People try to have a gain in business by someone else's expense, because they don't know, or they're not clear about it, and things like that. So we have to really be and this is why the pasuk ends with "Vayiretam Elohecha," fear God, Ani Hashem, I am God, is showing that they might not know, and you might think that you got away with it, and you were able to trick this person and manipulate him in a way that it's your gains. However, I know, meaning I, as in God, I know what you're really doing, and I know the ultimate truth, and therefore you shouldn't be doing this. Even in the case where you can, so to speak, and you can get away with it very easily, this is something that you shouldn't be doing. So I think also this applies a lot to children, because children obviously know less than us, or aren't aware of as much as us, and we sometimes will lie to them or withhold information. And that's obviously something we shouldn't do, like we spoke about a few minutes ago. We also see the idea that's connected to truth is about justice, right? About tzedek and a judicial system searching truth, right? It says tzedek tirdof leman techyeh, that you have to have justice in order to live and have a fulfilled life. We see also tzedek and creating a fair and true judicial system is something that's in the Sheva Mitzvot and Noach. That's a baseline of a productive and working society. And it's also one of the Aseret HaDivrot, right? Lo taneh beracha et shaker. Don't testify falsely, right? Don't be a false witness. And interesting is that the Torah brings an example of people called edim zomemim. What are they? Edim zomemim is that someone who comes and creates a false testimony to get someone else in trouble, right? Someone they don't like, or someone who wronged them, or whatever the reason may be. Maybe they're just not a nice person, and they try to get this person in trouble, and the judges find out that it was a lie. So what happens if they find out that this person was making, I said he stole and he really didn't, or whatever. So whatever punishment that was deemed to him, if that person had committed the crime, goes to the person who made up the lie, right? It says, you do to him what he wanted the outcome to be for his for the other person. Right? And you should destroy, burn out, erase the bad thing, the lie, the evil from the people, so that people would see that they shouldn't do this again, and create a society of lying and injustice and things that aren't connected to truth. So I want to just sort of sum up. We spoke, a lot of different angles here, but I want to sort of sum up. Why isn't this going? Hold on. Oh, okay. I really want to say a few things that we spoke about was the idea of always of truth being being an essential part of what God is and who God is and how he relates to the world, and how we have to, even though we are human and we are subjective, and it is a challenge for us to see an objective truth, so to speak, as God does, is that we have to always check ourselves in the best ability we can, and always say, I don't know, if we don't know. Or even, we talks about the idea of, if new information is presented to me and I change my opinion, don't feel the need to cover up and try to, like we said, fit into the schema that's right, and admit, I was wrong. And now I learned more information. I thought this way. I learned more information. So I'm going to change my opinion, or I'm going to change the truth that now I know more. So my truth is it developed into a more actualized truth. We also, I want to just sum about talking about the idea of half truths and misconstruing the truth and not exaggerating to make someone feel a certain way. And essentially, truthfulness will enhance our relationships, and lying will isolate you. So I want us to really think about it. It's something I think that is very extra challenging to us in this day and age, because we have the internet and anyone could put their truth and what they think. Anyone could write an article and put it on, and it's so hard to really know what is or isn't true, or isn't real. And we constantly have to be checking ourselves, and not taking what we see for granted, and trying as much as we can to see the real truth and connect to the reality, the reality that is there, and not that is someone else's projected reality. So I wish us all luck, because I think it's a big challenge, even more so in this day and age. And I hope it could help us build our relationships and connect to one another, and to adults to children, friends to each other, and not to have any mistruths or lies to disconnect us. So thank you, and I hope to see you next week.